What did your kid's teacher do that made you snap? My 14-year-old daughter with intellectual disabilities looked up at me with ink-blackened hands and said, "I'm a good helper," instead of telling me what she learned that day. Kayla had always loved showing me her worksheets after school. Her teacher, Mrs. Gracie, practically shoved me out the door when I tried to ask questions. I peered back through the window and saw something that made my blood run cold. Kayla was completely alone, feeding papers into an industrial shredder while every other kid was at lunch eating together. I started dropping by unannounced, and each visit revealed something worse. The first day, Kayla was organizing supplies. The next visit, she was scrubbing toilets without gloves. By Wednesday, I found her using chemical cleaners that required ventilation masks, and she didn't have one. Her hands were cracked and bleeding. Thursday, she couldn't hold a pencil because her fingers were so cut up from sorting metal recycling. I dumped her backpack that night and found nothing. Not a single worksheet in 3 months. When I tested her, she couldn't write her own name anymore. She used to know the alphabet. I confronted Mrs. Gracie, who smiled and said Kayla was getting life skills. When I demanded to see homework, she said, "These special helpers don't need that," and walked away. I called other families and discovered something horrifying. 8 kids were doing custodial work full-time. One boy had chemical burns. Another girl had been cleaning cafeteria grease traps. I installed a tracking app on Kayla's phone and watched for a week. 4 hours daily in the maintenance building, 2 hours in the main office, never in any classroom. When I asked Kayla when she last read a book, she couldn't remember. She said Mrs. Gracie told her she was too special for regular classes, but perfect for important helper work. The principal insisted everything was legal when I complained. He refused to show me any documentation. Other teachers started avoiding me in the hallways. Then Kayla came home with a bandaged hand from the paper shredder. She'd been told not to tell me. That's when I knew this went deeper than just one teacher. The principal was protecting Mrs. Gracie. The other teachers knew. Everyone knew these kids were being used, and nobody cared enough to stop it. My daughter was disappearing into their free labor system, forgetting everything she once knew, and they were calling it education. I demanded an emergency meeting and showed them Kayla's tracking data. The special education director barely glanced at it before saying this was vocational training, preparing Kayla for her future. I asked what future that was exactly. Unpaid janitor? She actually said I should be grateful because most of these kids won't amount to much anyway. I stood up and asked if my daughter was an employee or a student. If she was an employee, where was her paycheck? The director's face turned ugly, and she said, "People like you are the reason these kids never become independent." I spent the weekend documenting everything with photos of Kayla's injuries. Monday morning, I filed a federal complaint for violating disability education laws. The state sent investigators within 72 hours. They pulled the real records and found something that made even them gasp. These kids hadn't received any academic instruction in 4 months. Zero. But they'd logged over 300 hours of unpaid labor. The investigator interviewed Kayla privately, and she innocently told them Mrs. Gracie gave her candy when she cleaned really well, but took it away if she asked about reading time. More kids revealed they were punished if they mentioned wanting to go to real classes. The school board tried to hold a private emergency meeting, but I brought 43 families who'd been lied to. The superintendent called it a misunderstanding, while Mrs. Gracie sat there smirking. Then I held up Kayla's notebook and started reading out loud, page after page in my daughter's broken handwriting. "I don't need reading. I don't need math. I am a good helper." A father stood up and showed his son's scarred hands from cleaning chemicals. Another mother revealed her daughter had been held back 3 years, but still got passing grades. The investigator announced the district was under federal investigation. Mrs. Gracie finally stopped smirking when they mentioned criminal charges. She tried to speak, but people started shouting over her. The investigator had to call security. As they escorted Mrs. Gracie out, she kept muttering about ungrateful families not understanding these kids' limitations. Even as everyone lined the hallway watching her get removed, she kept her chin up like she was some kind of martyr. The state shut down the entire special education program that night for a complete audit of every single teacher and administrator who'd let this happen. They found 18 kids had been used as unpaid labor, while Mrs. Gracie collected their education funding. She got 5 years in federal prison for fraud and civil rights violations.